The crash had torn the sky apart 3 moons ago. Remembered it clearly. She had been leading her pack through the silver grass fields of the eastern plains when the burning star fell from above. It screamed through the purple clouds and struck the ground near the ancient stones with such force that the earth shook beneath her massive paws. Her wolves had scattered in fear, howling at the sky, believing the gods had sent punishment upon their land. But was not afraid. She was the great mother of the Iron Fang pack, the largest and most respected pack on all of Prime. She had lived through 40 winters and had faced creatures that would make lesser beings lose their minds to terror. A falling star would not break her courage. She had approached the crash site alone while her pack waited at a safe distance. The metal carcass of the strange object was still burning when she found it. Strange lights flickered inside, and sounds she had never heard before echoed from within. And then she saw it. A creature unlike anything she had ever witnessed in her long life. It was tiny, so impossibly tiny that at first she thought it was a newborn of some unknown species. It stood on 2 legs like the tree walkers of the southern forests, but it had no fur except for a patch on top of its head. Its skin was soft and pink, completely exposed to the elements. It wore strange coverings made of materials she could not identify, and it held a small device in its trembling hands that produced light. The creature looked up at her with wide eyes, stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder. Her teeth were longer than this being's entire arm. Her claws could tear through stone. One swipe of her paw could end this tiny life in an instant. But the creature did not run. It stood there, shaking with what she now understood was not fear but cold. The night winds of Prime were harsh, and this being had no protection against them. It made sounds from its mouth, strange patterns of noise that seemed to carry meaning. It was trying to communicate with her. Had lowered her massive head until her nose was mere inches from the creature. She could smell its blood, its sweat, its exhaustion. It had been injured in the crash. Dark liquid seeped from a wound on its head. It was dying. Something stirred in her ancient heart. Perhaps it was the maternal instinct that had driven her to raise 17 litters of pups over the decades. Perhaps it was curiosity about this being that had fallen from the stars. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something she could not name. She had gently picked up the tiny creature in her mouth, careful not to pierce its soft skin with her teeth, and carried it back to her den. That was 3 moons ago. Now, as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, lay in her sleeping chamber deep within the mountain caves that served as her pack's home. Her eyes were still closed, her massive body rising and falling with slow, peaceful breaths. The other wolves of her pack slept in chambers throughout the cave system, but she always slept alone. It was the privilege of the Great Mother. Except she no longer slept alone. A sound reached her ears. It was soft, barely audible even to her enhanced hearing. A tiny roar, if one could call it that. More like the growl of a newborn pup pretending to be fierce. It came from beside her pillow, a massive cushion of dried grass and soft furs that she had gathered over many years. Lips curled upward in what her pack had learned to recognize as amusement. She opened one golden eye and looked down. There he stood, the tiny creature from the stars, the human as he called himself. His name was Cole, a designation that had taken her nearly a full moon cycle to learn to pronounce correctly. He stood barely 2 feet tall compared to her enormous form, dressed in coverings he had fashioned from scraps of fur she had given him. His head wound had healed, leaving only a thin scar across his forehead. He had grown stronger over the past 3 moons, filling out the thin frame that had nearly died in her care. And now he stood beside her pillow, his hands cupped around his mouth, making tiny roaring sounds to wake her up. He had adapted so quickly to life among them. At first, he had been terrified, and rightfully so. Her pack had wanted to eat him. To them, he was nothing more than a strange morsel of meat that their great mother had inexplicably decided to keep as a pet. but had proven himself to be far more than any of them expected. The first surprise came when they discovered he was intelligent, not just animal smart, but truly intelligent in a way that rivaled their own kind. He learned their language within 2 moon cycles, an achievement that had stunned even the eldest members of her pack. The wolves had believed themselves to be the only truly intelligent species on their world. The discovery that this tiny being could think, reason, and communicate had shaken many of their fundamental beliefs. The second surprise came when they learned what he could do. Stopped his tiny roaring when he saw that his eye was open and watching him. He straightened his small body and cleared his throat in that peculiar way humans did before speaking. "Great Mother," he said, his voice carrying the careful pronunciation he had worked so hard to master. Their language was difficult for his tiny throat to produce, but he managed it with determination that she admired. "The morning light has arrived. I have prepared my first official morning report for the pack." Raised her massive head from the pillow, causing to take a step back to avoid being knocked over. She yawned, displaying rows of teeth that could crush boulders, and stretched her enormous body. The cave shook slightly as she moved. "Morning report," she asked, her voice a deep rumble that echoed through the chamber. "What is this morning report?" Reached into a small pouch he had made from leather scraps and pulled out several pieces of flat bark. He had scratched markings onto them using a sharp stone, creating symbols that represented information he had gathered. "In my world," he explained, "those who served in groups like your pack would give reports each morning. We would share information about what we had observed, what dangers we had detected, and what opportunities we had found. It helped the group make better decisions and stay safe." Tilted her head, a gesture she had picked up from watching express curiosity. "You wish to give such a report to my pack?" "If you will allow it, Great Mother. I know I am small and weak compared to your wolves. I cannot hunt the great beasts of your plains or fight the enemies that threaten your territory, but I have other abilities. I have been watching, learning, and thinking. I believe I have information that could help the Iron Fang pack." The conviction in his tiny voice struck something in his heart. Here was a creature that by all rights should have died 3 moons ago. He had crashed on an alien world, been found by predators that could swallow him whole, and had every reason to despair. Instead, he had chosen to adapt. He had chosen to find a way to contribute. He had chosen to make himself useful rather than simply accepting his fate as a helpless victim. This thought was why she had saved him, not because of maternal instinct or curiosity. She had sensed something in this tiny being that first night, something that burned brighter than the fires of his crashed vessel, a spirit that refused to be extinguished. "Very well," she said, rising to her full height. "Gather your bark pieces, little one. We shall go to the great hall and summon the pack. You will give your morning report." His face split into a wide smile, an expression that had learned indicated happiness in humans. He quickly gathered his materials and scrambled onto her lowered paw when she offered it. She lifted him carefully and placed him on her shoulder, where he had learned to hold onto her thick fur for stability. They made their way through the winding tunnels of the cave system toward the great hall. Other wolves saw them pass and stopped to watch. Some regarded with hostility, others with curiosity, and a few with something approaching respect. Word had spread through the pack about the tiny creature's intelligence, but many still doubted that something so small could offer anything of value. The great hall was an enormous cavern at the center of the mountain, lit by phosphorescent crystals that grew from the walls and ceiling. Hundreds of wolves could fit within its space, and it served as the gathering place for pack meetings, celebrations, and important announcements. Howled and the sound echoed through every tunnel of the cave system. It was the summons for a pack gathering. Within minutes, wolves began pouring into the great hall from all directions. They ranged in size from young adults barely 8 feet tall to massive elders who rivaled herself. They arranged themselves in a rough semicircle facing the raised stone platform where stood stood on her shoulder, suddenly very aware of the hundreds of golden eyes focused on him. He swallowed hard but did not let his fear show. He had faced worse odds in his life. He had survived a crash that should have killed him, lived through weeks of injury and illness, and learned an entirely alien language. He could do this. "My pack," announced, her voice filling the hall. "Many of you have questioned my decision to keep this creature alive. Many of you have wondered why I would waste resources on a being so small and weak. Today, you will begin to understand." She lowered her head and allowed to climb down onto the stone platform. He looked almost comically tiny standing there before the assembled wolves, like a mouse addressing an audience of giants. But he stood straight, held his head high, and spoke with a clear voice. "Wolves of the Iron Fang Pack," he began. "I am Cole, a human from a world called Earth. 3 moons ago I fell from the sky and should have died. Your great mother saved my life, and for that I owe her a debt I can never fully repay. But I wish to try." He held up his bark pieces, displaying the symbols he had carved onto them. "I have been watching your territory. I have been studying your hunting patterns, your enemy movements, and your resource locations. I cannot fight beside you or hunt with you, but I can think. I can observe things you might miss. I can see patterns that might escape your notice. This is the gift my people have developed over thousands of generations. We are small and weak, but we survived on our world by using our minds." A large wolf near the front of the crowd snorted dismissively. "What can a creature that fits in my mouth possibly observe that we cannot?" Turned to face the wolf directly, showing no fear despite the obvious threat in the larger being's voice. "Tell me," replied, "have you noticed that the river fish have been swimming upstream earlier than usual this season? Have you observed that the migration patterns of the grass runners have shifted eastward by approximately 3 days compared to last year? Have you calculated that if these patterns continue, your primary hunting grounds will be depleted within 2 moon cycles?" The wolf's eyes widened. Others in the crowd began murmuring among themselves. "How do you know this?" another wolf demanded. "Because I watch," said simply. "I watch and I count and I remember. My body is weak, but my mind never stops working. I have spent 3 moons doing nothing but observing your world and trying to understand it, and I have learned things that I believe can help you." He turned to, who watched him with an unreadable expression. "Great Mother, with your permission, I would like to present my first morning report to the pack. It contains information about food sources, potential threats, and opportunities that I have identified over the past moon cycle. If the pack finds it useful, I would like to continue providing such reports each morning." The great hall fell silent. Every wolf waited for response. She looked down at the tiny human standing before her pack with nothing but carved bark and determination. She thought about all the times she had doubted whether saving him was the right choice. She thought about the mockery she had endured from other pack leaders who had heard about her pet from the sky. And she thought about the fire she saw burning in his small eyes. The same fire she had seen that first night when he stood before her, injured and dying, but refusing to run. "Speak," she commanded. "Let us hear what our smallest pack member has to say." Smiled again and began his report. And as he spoke, sharing observations and insights that many of the wolves had never considered, the atmosphere in the great hall began to change. Dismissal turned to interest. Interest turned to amazement, and amazement turned to something else entirely. For the first time since he had crashed on this alien world, Cole felt like he might have found a place where he belonged. The tiny human from Earth had given the wolves of Prime something they had never expected. Hope. The seasons changed quickly on Prime. 4 moon cycles had passed since delivered his first morning report, and the world around the Iron Fang territory had transformed from silver grass plains to frozen white expanses. The harsh winter of this alien world made Earth's coldest region seem mild in comparison. Had adapted, he always adapted. It was perhaps the greatest gift of his species. He now wore thick furs that had helped him fashion from the pelts of small prey animals. He had constructed a small shelter within the Great Mother's sleeping chamber, a tiny dwelling made of bark, stone, and leather that kept him warm through the freezing nights. He ate cooked meat, having taught himself to make fire using techniques he remembered from survival training back on Earth. The wolves had been fascinated by this ability, having never developed fire themselves despite their intelligence. His morning reports had become essential to pack life. Every dawn, wolves would gather in the Great Hall to hear what the tiny human had observed. His predictions about the fish migration had proven accurate, allowing the pack to adjust their fishing rotations and store enough food before the river froze. His warnings about a weakening section of the cave ceiling had prevented a collapse that could have killed dozens. His calculations about prey movements had increased hunting success by nearly 30%. But not everyone was pleased with the human's rising influence. Was the largest male in the Iron Fang pack, a massive wolf who stood 14 feet at the shoulder and whose silver fur was marked with countless scars from battles won. He had been the pack's war leader for 15 years, commanding their fighters in conflicts with rival packs and predatory beasts. His position had always been second only to the Great Mother herself. Now, wolves were beginning to listen to the tiny creature's words with more attention than they gave to his commands. Now, young wolves would seek out for advice rather than approaching him. Now, his authority was being questioned by a being he could crush with a single step. Watched from the shadows at the edge of the Great Hall as delivered his morning report on this particular frozen dawn. The human stood on the stone platform, his breath visible in the cold air, pointing to new symbols he had carved onto his bark pieces. The winter storms are following an unusual pattern this cycle, was explaining. Based on my observations of wind directions and cloud formations over the past 10 days, I believe a severe blizzard will strike our territory within 3 to 4 days. It will likely last for at least 2 full days and will make hunting impossible during that time. Several wolves shifted nervously at this news. Furthermore, continued, I have been tracking the movements of the Shadow Claw pack to our north. They have been pushing their hunting parties closer to our border over the past moon cycle. I believe they are planning a territorial challenge, most likely timed to coincide with the coming storm when they think we will be weakened and distracted. His ears perked up at this information. You believe they will attack during the blizzard? It is what I would do in their position, Great Mother. The storm provides cover for movement, and their pack is better adapted to extreme cold than ours. If they strike while we are scattered and unprepared, they could take significant territory before we can mount a proper defense. Pushed his way through the crowd, his massive form causing other wolves to scramble out of his path. He stopped at the edge of the platform and glared down with undisguised contempt. You overstep, creature, growled. War and defense are my responsibility. Who are you to speak of such matters? Met the war leader's gaze without flinching. He had learned long ago that showing fear to aggressive beings only invited more aggression. I speak only what I observe, war leader. I mean no disrespect to your authority, but my observations suggest that the Shadow Claw pack poses a threat that should be addressed. How we address it is, of course, your decision and the Great Mother's. Your observations, sneered. You are a soft-skinned weakling who cannot even survive our winter without wrapping yourself in dead animal skins. What could you possibly understand about war? I understand patterns, replied calmly. I understand that the Shadow Claw hunting parties have been probing our borders with increasing frequency. I understand that their main force has been gathering near the Broken Tooth Ridge, which would be an ideal staging point for an assault on our eastern territories. And I understand that underestimating an enemy because of their size is a mistake that has cost many lives throughout history. The implication was not lost on anyone in the hall. Eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you threatening me, tiny one? I am advising caution, war leader, nothing more. Stepped forward, positioning herself between and the platform where stood. The tension in the hall was thick enough to taste. "Enough," she commanded. "The human's observations have proven valuable many times. You will consider his information when planning our defense." "Great Mother, I must protest. Taking military counsel from this creature is beneath us. It goes against everything our pack has stood for." "What our pack has stood for," replied, her voice hardening, "is survival and strength. The human has contributed to both since his arrival. Your pride does not change these facts." His massive body trembled with barely contained rage, but he bowed his head in submission. To challenge the Great Mother directly would be unthinkable, no matter how angry he might be. "As you command, Great Mother. But I warn you, placing too much trust in an outsider will bring disaster upon us all." He turned and stormed out of the great hall, his heavy footsteps echoing through the tunnels long after he had disappeared from sight. The wolves dispersed slowly, many casting uncertain glances between the direction had gone and the tiny human still standing on the platform. The pack's unity was fracturing, and everyone could feel it. Later that day, found himself alone in sleeping chamber, working on new bark pieces by the light of a small fire he had built in a stone pit. The warmth was welcome against the cold that seeped through the mountain walls despite the cave's depth. Entered silently, her massive form somehow graceful despite its size. She settled onto her sleeping cushion and regarded with thoughtful golden eyes. "You made an enemy today, little one." Did not look up from his work. "I have made enemies before. It is a consequence of speaking truth that others do not wish to hear." Is dangerous. He commands the loyalty of many warriors in the pack. If he decides you are a threat that must be eliminated, protecting you will become difficult. "Do you believe I should have remained silent?" Was quiet for a long moment. "No. Your warning about the Shadow Claw pack aligns with reports from our own scouts. You spoke truth, and truth should not be suppressed merely because it causes discomfort." Finally set down his work and looked up at the enormous wolf, who had saved his life and given him a place in this strange world. "May I ask you something, Great Mother?" "You may." "Why did you save me? That first night when you found me in the wreckage of my ship, you could have eaten me. You could have left me to die. Instead, you carried me to your den and nursed me back to health. Why?" His expression grew distant, as if she was looking at something far beyond the walls of the cave. "When I was young, much younger than you might believe, our pack was nearly destroyed. A great sickness swept through our population, killing wolves faster than new ones could be born. We were reduced to less than 20 members. Many believed we would perish entirely." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "My mother was the Great Mother then. She led the survivors through those dark times by doing something our kind had never done before. She formed alliances with other species. Creatures we had always considered prey or competitors became our partners. Together, we survived what we could not have survived alone." "What happened to those alliances?" "They faded over time. As our pack grew strong again, many forgot the lessons of those desperate days. They returned to seeing other species as either threats or resources, nothing more. But my mother taught me something that I have never forgotten." Waited silently for her to continue. "She taught me that strength comes in many forms. The obvious strength of tooth and claw is only one kind. There is also the strength of mind, of spirit, of cooperation. A pack that relies only on physical power will eventually meet something physically stronger. But a pack that combines different kinds of strength becomes something greater than the sum of its parts." She looked down at with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "When I found you that night, dying in the wreckage of your sky vessel, I saw something in you. A different kind of strength, one that our pack lacked. I did not save you out of kindness or pity. I saved you because I recognized that you could make us stronger." "And have I made you stronger?" "You have already begun to. But the true test is coming. The Shadow Claw Pack has been our rival for generations. If they attack during this storm, as you predict, we will face one of the greatest challenges in our history, and I believe you will play a crucial role in determining whether we survive. Felt the weight of her words settle onto his small shoulders. He was one human on an alien world, surrounded by massive creatures that could end his existence without effort. And yet, here he was, being told that the fate of an entire pack might depend on him. What would you have me do? Rose to her feet, her shadow falling across his small form. Prepare, think, observe. Do what humans do best according to what you have told me. Find a way to help us win a battle we may not be able to win alone. She walked toward the chamber exit, but paused at the entrance. And do not let's see that you are afraid. Wolves can smell fear, and fear is weakness in his eyes. She disappeared into the tunnels, leaving alone with his fire and his thoughts. He worked through the night, scratching symbols onto bark, making calculations, considering possibilities. His mind raced through everything he had learned about Prime, the Iron Fang Pack, and the Shadow Claw Pack over the past months. He thought about terrain and weather and pack psychology and military tactics. By the time dawn approached, he had the beginnings of a plan. The blizzard arrived exactly when had predicted, on the third day after his warning. The winds howled across the plains with a ferocity that shook the mountain caves. Snow piled higher than even the tallest wolves could see over. Temperature dropped to levels that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. Gave his morning report from inside's chamber rather than the great hall. Only a small group of senior wolves had gathered to hear him, was notably absent, having taken a group of warriors to patrol the territory despite the dangerous conditions. My scouts reported Shadow Claw movement near the eastern border before the storm hit, informed him. Believes they will strike today or tomorrow while visibility is lowest. They will strike today, said with certainty. The storm will begin to weaken by tomorrow. They will want to attack at the height of the blizzard for maximum concealment. How can you be so sure? Because it is what I would do, and based on everything I have learned about the Shadow Claw Pack's previous attacks, their war leader thinks similarly to how I think. He is a strategist. He will take every advantage he can get. His ears flattened against her skull. Then we may already be too late. Is out there with only 40 warriors, if the full Shadow Claw force catches them in the open. We need to get them back inside the caves, agreed. But I have another idea as well, one that might turn this attack to our advantage. He spread out his bark pieces on the stone floor, displaying a crude map he had assembled of the territory. The Shadow Claw Pack expects to find us scattered and unprepared. They expect to catch small groups of our wolves in the storm and destroy them before they can regroup. But what if we let them think they are succeeding while actually drawing them into a trap? The senior wolves leaned in closer, their skepticism gradually giving way to interest as outlined his plan. It was audacious, it was risky, and it relied heavily on concepts that the wolves had never considered before, strategies from human military history adapted to suit the unique conditions of Prime. But as finished explaining, found herself smiling that subtle wolf smile of hers. You truly are a remarkable creature, Cole. I am a survivor, Great Mother. It is what humans do. We find ways to survive situations that should be impossible. And right now, survival means winning this battle. She rose to her full height and addressed the gathered wolves. Send the fastest runners to recall in his patrol. Tell them to fall back toward the frozen falls just as the human described. The rest of you spread the word through the pack. Today, we follow the small one's plan. The wolves dispersed to carry out her orders, stood alone in the chamber, listening to the howling of the storm outside. Somewhere out there, in that raging blizzard, the Shadow Claw Pack was moving toward them. They expected to find weak prey hiding from the cold. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The frozen falls were a natural wonder of the Eastern Territory, a place where a wide river tumbled over a cliff face and crashed into a deep basin below. During summer, the falls roared with such power that conversation was impossible within 100 meters. During winter, they transformed into a cathedral of ice, the frozen water forming massive columns and sheets that glittered like crystal when sunlight struck them. Today, with the blizzard raging and no sunlight to be found, the frozen falls were simply cold and deadly. Ice-slicked rocks surrounded the basin. Hidden crevasses waited to swallow any creature that stepped wrong. The constant spray of freezing mist coated everything in a treacherous glaze. It was perfect. Crouched in a small cave behind the frozen waterfall itself, watching through a crack in the ice as the plan unfolded. Beside him sat, her massive body folded into the cramped space with obvious discomfort. She had insisted on staying with him, claiming it was to protect him but actually suspected, because she wanted to witness what happened next. And his patrol had received the message and fallen back toward the falls just as instructed. They had made their retreat obvious, leaving clear trails in the snow for the Shadow Claw pack to follow. To the enemy, it would look like panicked wolves fleeing a stronger force. Now and his 40 warriors waited in the tree line at the eastern edge of the basin, hidden among the frozen trunks of ancient conifers. They were the bait, the visible portion of the trap. The real danger waited elsewhere. Had spent weeks studying the terrain around the Iron Fang territory, and he had discovered something about the frozen falls that no wolf had ever considered. The ice formation above the waterfall was unstable. The seasonal temperature variations had created stress fractures throughout the frozen mass, fractures that were invisible to the eye but predictable to someone who understood the physics of ice expansion and contraction. A precisely placed impact at the right location would trigger a cascade failure. Thousands of tons of ice would collapse into the basin below, crushing anything unfortunate enough to be trapped there. The trick was getting the enemy into position. "They are coming," whispered, her enhanced senses detecting movement that could not perceive through the storm. Minutes passed in tense silence, then saw them, dark shapes emerging from the white curtain of the blizzard. Shadow Claw wolves, their gray-black fur making them nearly invisible against the snowy backdrop. They moved in a hunting formation, spreading out to surround what they believed was their trapped prey. Counted as they appeared, 50, 70, 100, more kept coming, materializing from the storm like vengeful spirits. This was no simple raiding party. This was the full strength of the Shadow Claw pack, at least 200 warriors sent to crush the Iron Fang once and for all. The enemy war leader was easy to identify, a monster even larger than who stalked at the center of the formation. He howled commands that could not understand, but the meaning was clear. Surround them, cut off their escape, destroy them. Played his part perfectly. He and his wolves began retreating toward the basin, making it look like they were being pushed back by the overwhelming enemy numbers. The Shadow Claw pack pressed forward eagerly, scenting easy victory. "They are entering the basin," reported, her voice tight with tension. "Over half their force is inside the trap zone now." "We need more," replied. "Wait for my signal." The enemy war leader entered the basin with his personal guard, clearly wanting to be present when the Iron Fang wolves were slaughtered. His arrogance, reflected, was no different from that of countless human tyrants throughout history. Power bred overconfidence, and overconfidence bred mistakes. When estimated that nearly 80% of the Shadow Claw force was positioned within the kill zone, he acted. He had prepared 3 fire bundles during the previous night, small packages of dry tinder and resin-soaked bark that would burn brightly even in the worst weather. He lit the first one now and hurled it out through the crack in the ice, watching it arc through the blizzard like a falling star. It landed exactly where he had calculated, on the eastern ridge above the falls. The bright flame stood out against the white landscape like a beacon. Throughout the territory, hidden Iron Fang wolves saw the signal and responded. From the northern approach came another 200 wolves who had circled around during the night, cutting off the enemy's retreat. From the southern cliff edges came archers, wolves trained in using their tails to launch sharpened bone projectiles, a technique that had helped them develop over the past months. They rained death down upon the confused Shadow Claw warriors who suddenly found themselves surrounded rather than surrounding. But that was only the first phase of the plan. Lit the second fire bundle and threw it toward a very specific spot on the ice formation above the waterfall. The bundle struck true, its flames beginning to melt a small section of the already stressed ice. "Now we move," said urgently. "We have perhaps 2 minutes before the cascade begins." Grabbed him in her jaws and burst from the cave, leaping onto the rocks beside the falls and scrambling towards safety with speed that seemed impossible for a creature her size. Around the basin, Iron Fang wolves were doing the same, pulling back from the trap zone according to the timing had drilled into them. The Shadow Claw pack was in chaos. Attacked from multiple directions, trapped in unfamiliar terrain, their coordination had completely collapsed. Their war leader was screaming orders that no one could hear above the howling wind and the clash of battle. Then the ice gave way. It started as a crack, barely audible above the storm. Then another crack and another. A groan of stressed ice echoed across the basin. And then, with a sound like the world breaking apart, the entire frozen waterfall collapsed. Massive chunks of ice tumbled down into the basin, crushing wolves beneath them. The shock wave knocked others off their feet. Jagged shards flew through the air like weapons, tearing through flesh and bone. The carefully positioned trap had become a killing field. When the collapse finally ended, nearly half of the Shadow Claw force lay dead or dying beneath tons of frozen debris. The survivors were scattered, disoriented, and completely demoralized. The Iron Fang wolves did not waste the opportunity. They fell upon their enemies with the fury of creatures fighting for their home and their families. The battle that followed was brutal but brief. Wolves who had expected an easy victory found themselves fighting desperately for survival. Watched from back as she rejoined the fight, her massive jaws crushing enemies that came too close. He felt sick at the carnage around him, the screams and the blood and the dying. This was not the first battle he had witnessed, but it was the first where he had been responsible for so many deaths. Yet he knew it had been necessary. The Shadow Claw pack would not have stopped with a simple territorial gain. They would have hunted the Iron Fang to extinction, killed the pups and the elderly, destroyed everything that pack had built over generations. Sometimes, survival required terrible choices. The enemy war leader tried to rally his remaining forces for a final stand, but it was hopeless. Surrounded, outnumbered, and completely broken, the Shadow Claw wolves began to surrender. Those who refused to yield were killed quickly. By the time the blizzard finally began to ease, the battle was over. The Iron Fang pack had lost 73 warriors, a painful toll that would be mourned for many seasons. But the Shadow Claw pack had lost over 150, including their war leader and most of their senior fighters. They would never threaten the Iron Fang territory again. As dawn broke on the following day, revealing a landscape transformed by the storm and the battle, stood in the great hall and delivered his morning report. The hall was more crowded than ever before. Every wolf who could walk had come to hear what the tiny human would say. Even was there, his silver fur matted with blood from his wounds, watching with an expression that the human could not read. "The threat from the Shadow Claw pack has been neutralized," began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Our scouts report that their survivors are retreating toward their home territory. They will need many seasons to recover from their losses." He paused, looking out at the assembled wolves. But this victory did not come without cost. 73 of our warriors gave their lives yesterday. They died protecting their families, their territory, and their future. They deserve to be remembered not just as casualties of war, but as heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice. Step forward. The human speaks truth. Our fallen will be honored with the ceremonies of our ancestors. Their names will be carved into the wall of heroes, and their stories will be told for generations. She turned to face the pack, her golden eyes sweeping across the crowd. But there is another matter we must address. The strategy that won this battle did not come from our traditional ways. It came from a creature that many of you believed had no place among us. A being that some called worthless, weak, and unworthy of the resources spent to keep him alive. Her gaze settled on. The war leader met her eyes without flinching, but something had changed in his expression. Called, "Come forward." The massive wolf pushed through the crowd and stood before the platform and waited. Silence fell over the hall as every wolf held their breath, waiting to see what would happen between the war leader who had opposed the human and the great mother who had protected him. Looked at for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his great head until his nose nearly touched the stone floor in the deepest gesture of respect that wolves could offer. "I was wrong," said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "I judged you by your size and your softness. I saw only what was weak and missed what was strong. Your mind saved more lives yesterday than my claws ever have in a single battle." He raised his head and Met's eyes directly. "Among my people, a debt of honor must be acknowledged publicly. You have saved my life, the lives of my warriors, and the future of our pack. I, war leader of the Iron Fang pack, acknowledge this debt. From this day forward, no harm will come to you from any wolf under my command. And if any creature threatens you, they will face my fangs as surely as if they threatened my own blood." Felt tears forming in his eyes, though he fought to hold them back. On his world, he had been no one special. A mid-level explorer on a routine survey mission, nothing more. He had crashed on this alien planet expecting to die alone and forgotten. Instead, he had found a family. "I accept your words, war leader," replied formally, "and I offer my own in return. For as long as I live, my mind will serve the Iron Fang pack. Your enemies will be my enemies. Your victories will be my victories, and your future will be my future." Stepped between them, her presence commanding the attention of every wolf in the hall. Today marks a new chapter in the history of our pack. For too long, we believed that strength could only be measured in physical power. We were wrong. True strength comes from many sources, and wisdom lies in recognizing and embracing all of them. She looked down with something that might have been pride. "From this day forward, Cole will no longer be considered an outsider among us. By my authority as Great Mother, I name him Voice of the Dawn, official advisor to the Iron Fang pack. His morning reports will be heard with the same respect given to any senior member of our community. His counsel will be sought in matters of strategy and planning. He will have a voice in our councils and a place at our hearths." The wolves began to howl, a sound of acknowledgement and celebration that echoed through the mountain caves. Stood among them, tiny but somehow belonging, feeling the vibration of their voices in his bones. Later, after the ceremonies had ended and the pack had dispersed to tend their wounds and begin the long process of rebuilding, found himself alone within her sleeping chamber. He sat by his small fire, warming his hands, while she settled onto her cushion with a heavy sigh. "You could have died yesterday," she said quietly, "when the ice collapsed, if your calculations had been even slightly wrong." "But they were not wrong," replied. "Mathematics does not lie, Great Mother. If you understand the forces involved, you can predict outcomes with reasonable accuracy." "Is that what you call it, mathematics?" "It is one name for it. The study of patterns and relationships, the language of the universe, some of my people called it." Was silent for a moment. Your people must be remarkable to have developed such knowledge while being so physically vulnerable. We had no choice. We could not outrun our predators or overpower them with strength. So we learned to think our way to survival. We built tools because our bodies were weak. We formed societies because alone we were helpless. We studied the world because understanding it was the only way we could control it. And now you have brought that knowledge to us. Looked up at the massive wolf, who had saved his life on that first night so many months ago. You saved a dying stranger when you had no reason to. You protected me when your own pack wanted me dead. You gave me a chance to prove my worth when everyone else saw only a weak, worthless creature. He stood and walked toward her, stopping when he was close enough to touch her thick fur. Whatever I have given to the Iron Fang pack is nothing compared to what you have given me. You gave me a home, great mother. You gave me a family. You gave me a purpose when I thought I had lost everything. Lowered her massive head until her golden eyes were level with his. We are pack now, little one, and pack takes care of pack. As the night deepened and the mountain grew quiet around them, the Great Mother and the voice of the dawn settled into a comfortable silence. Outside, the last of the storm clouds were clearing, revealing stars that had learned to navigate by but had never thought of as home. Now, looking up at those alien constellations through a crack in the cave ceiling, he realized that home was not about where you came from or what you looked like. Home was about where you belonged. And Cole, the tiny human who had fallen from the sky, finally knew exactly where he belonged. Among the wolves, beneath the purple skis of Prime, he had found his place in the universe. Many seasons would pass. The Iron Fang pack would grow stronger, guided by the unlikely partnership between their Great Mother and their small advisor. Other packs would hear stories of the voice of the dawn, the tiny creature who could predict the future and turn the tide of battles with nothing but carved bark and a brilliant mind. Some would come seeking alliance. Others would come seeking to test whether the legends were true. All would learn, one way or another, that the Iron Fang pack had become something new under its leadership. A pack that measured strength not just in fangs and claws, but in wisdom and adaptability, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected. A pack that had learned the most important lesson that species had discovered over thousands of generations of survival against impossible odds. That sometimes the smallest voices make the biggest difference. And every morning, as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, would wake to the sound of tiny roars beside her pillow. The voice of the dawn would be standing there with his bark pieces and his observations, ready to deliver another morning report. Ready to help his pack face whatever challenges the new day might bring. The wolves had given him a home, and he had given them hope. It was, perhaps, the most human thing he could have done.